You're listening to the Games User Researcher Book podcast, a show that explores the world of user experience research in video games. My name is Leonard Nacker, and together with my co-hosts Anders Drachen and Pejman Mirza Babai, we edited the book on games user research. This podcast covers pretty much everything we couldn't fit into the book. Find out more about us on gerbook.com or grab the book from Oxford University Press.
Today we'll be talking about the impact of games user research, what it is, and what we hope to achieve with our work across industry and academia, and whether we are successful in delivering that impact. I am Anders Drachen, and with me, as usual, are my co-hosts Leonard Nacker and Pejman Mirza Babai. So, Leonard, let me roll the ball straight over to you with the first question of the day, which basically is like, what the heck is impact anyway? On the academic side of the pond, impact seems to take up a lot of talking room. All university chancellors and others will be talking about research impact all the time. A bit less so, perhaps, on the industry side. So let's start by defining what we mean with impact, and talking a little bit about the what impact means in different contexts. Perhaps also how we actually measure this weird thing.
Yeah, thanks for the question, Anders. I think the problem that we have is that impact is, to different things, to different people, it means different things, right? So impact very much, if you're looking as a user experience professional in the industry, I think is measured in terms of how much actionable outcome your research can achieve, right? So insights are good, and insight, as academics, we value insights, and we can take insights and ruminate on them and, have a theoretical discussion, but it is much more important for those insights to be actionable if you're in industry. And I think we've touched upon that before, that we said really insights are good, but insights are even better when you turn insights into action. So I think in terms of impact, the measure that you would put there is to think about how many people can take action with the insights that you're generating as a user researcher. So thinking about how to prepare and tell your story as a games user researcher so that you could have the biggest possible crowd to understand the things that you're delivering, I think is a measure of impact in that regard. What do you think?
But it almost feels like that this would be a sticking within the academic vernacular, a pathway to impact. So why our user research, we are trying to, if I understand it right, we're trying to enable the largest possible amount of people to take action. But that action doesn't necessarily lead to impact, right? So like is impact that we are selling more games, that our players are happier as they play the game? Like what's the ultimately what's the end point of the chain?
Yeah, I saw it more for the games user researcher. Sorry for the delay. I think I saw it more for a games user researcher in terms of the impact that a games user researcher has on a team and that they have on the community at large. I think the way that you're framing it right now is more, okay, so what does it mean for the business, for the game studio, for the developer? What does impact mean for the artifact that you're creating? So, of course, if you're looking at that, then impact means how many lives are you touching? How transformative is your gameplay? How engaged are people with playing it? Because you can have a very devoted but very small user base that is profoundly changed by the product that you're creating, versus, this large AAA game that also touches many people's lives, but goes way beyond that and has just a whole realm of interpretation attached to it. So I do think that's something, that is important to consider. impact in terms of what? Impact in terms of the company, the business, or impact for you as an individual, as a games user researcher? I think we need to make those distinctions.
Yeah. It's like, because there's no single from your work as a user researcher. There's no single line to something called impact, right? It's more like a chain, and perhaps even a cycle. But I'm actually, if I may be a bit provocative, that you don't really mention money at all. You mention how many lives that we are touching, the transformative experience of playing the game. But what about sales or in-app purchases? Is that a measure of impact for user research, or is it not something that we focus on at all?
I think it's a side effect. I think I don't know if Pejman has a different perspective on that, because I don't want to take up all the talking time here, but I do think it's a side effect a little bit, right? Like, to have impact, you need to sell a lot of copies, right? So the question really is, yeah, does one come with the other? I think they're always attached, right? Like, unless you're selling a lot of copies, you can't touch people's lives. But to sell a lot of copies, you need to have a gameplay that touches people in a way, because otherwise they won't play your game. So I think it's directly related.
That would be interesting to think about. I think, like, only looking at impact without other things attached to it, it might be very, vague to try to talk about it. One thing, both as for an individual or a team or a company or a particular game, I think, maybe we should also discuss, what are our goals, what are our success, and then impact is, to me, is how we are getting closer to that goal, to that success. So as an individual, maybe your key goal is like a career growth. Your key goal might be, earning more, increasing your salary. And then as a user researcher, how can you run studies? How can you work in your team to get to your personal goal faster? Again, that might sound a bit selfish, but could be a goal. Then you may have a game, and your goal might be, be very innovative in that game. Like, you don't care about like money. You just want to make a really innovative new design, idea, interaction, whatever you want to call it. And a user researcher can help the team to achieve that, and then they may have an impact. And it could be also, as a company, you may want to have a number of successful titles, or show growth in your number of users that you are interacting with. So basically, I think that goal and the measure of success is something important to have in mind, and then how we can get closer to that. That's where we can see our impact. And obviously, there could be overlapping things. Like, again, if you're a person who wants to earn more money, you're probably gonna work harder and do good studies or whatever that helps the game, but also helps yourself and helps your team maybe as well. In a best case scenario, I guess there could be other scenarios here, but I think they are kind of interconnected.
So it almost feels like that if we're talking about impact in the sense of game development, there are many different spheres of impact or areas, and there's impact for yourself, there's impact for your team, there's impact for the game, there's impact for the business of the company, there's impact for the players, and ultimately somewhere beyond that, impact for society, right? And you would almost envision it as some sort of a Venn diagram where some of these areas overlap in their motivations, right? I actually kind of like that view on it. But if we then turn to academia, because there are hundreds of academics worldwide, if not more, working with what we could identify as games user research or user experience research in games, or similar, or using similar terminology. What does impact look like on the academic side?
I would say it probably is similar. It's like, again, how you see your world, what's your goal? You may be an academics that your goal might be to, train more students and make sure your students are successful. Then the impact probably means, you know, for you, it means like seeing how those students find jobs, what sort of progress they have in their career. You may want to be getting loads of grants, maybe, and then that needs its own requirement, and then and that's where you see your work, or like citation. Sometimes people talk about it as a measure of impact. So again, I think very similar to the game industry, there are interrelated goals and measure of success, and how you get through that is with each of your action is like to see the impact of that action towards that particular goal. There could be also goals that are connected to each other. Like getting more grants means usually you're gonna have more students, and then the students gonna have loads of money to spend, and like access to better equipment, gonna learn new things. So it's not necessary. I'm not necessarily saying that these are like solo goal and like individual, but they are also like connected to each other.
I think it's a really good point that you have there in terms of this snowball effect that you have. So if you look at impact as something that has a positive feedback loop, I think that's a really nice way of looking at it, because yes, if you're successful, and in academia that starts like you publish something, a lot of people find it applicable, so you get a lot of citations. The citations then facilitate you getting grants, which facilitates you getting more money, which means more students, more equipment, which means you can do better research. So it is this whole snowball effect. So all of a sudden you're creating more impact. You're creating a much stronger output generation machine essentially there. So it's interesting to look at that. And in industry, the question is, does it work the same way? If your game gets played by a lot of people, that means a lot of people are buying the game, which means a lot of money is coming into the company. But I guess at that point, it's about leadership and maturity of the company, because does it mean that the company is making the decision to reinvest that money in games user research? Not always, right? And that's really how impact would be created for the games user research team to see, okay, we're selling a lot of copies. Maybe it's thanks to the user research, which means maybe we should move up one step in that maturity model, that we foster and create more user research impact with our company. So, strategic thinking, I think, is really important there to create that impact on the company side.
I noticed that on the academic side, you're not really mentioning changing the world. We're talking about training more students, which is absolutely laudable. We're talking about getting more grants, more citations. These are all, I could go on late about those types of measures of academic success, right? But what I'm missing perhaps here is a little bit like this academic research actually changing how games are made, or changing or positively impacting the user experience of playing games, or having some sort of other real world benefits or sort of impacts. Should that be a part of our vocabulary here, or and how good are we at delivering that kind of value?
Yeah, I think an important factor there to distinguish is between the impact of the product and the impact of the researcher, right? So again, I think what you're talking about there is also impact of the product. So if the product or artifact touches people's lives and it changes, how we see something, how we think about something, and of course they're linked, right? Like if you are a good user researcher and you create a more compelling product, it means people have more interesting insights into their life and into the world. They broaden their view. It's cultural impact and things like that. So yeah, but I do think that distinction is important: product versus user researcher. And I do think maybe Pejman has a bigger idea about what does it mean for the user researcher then.
Yeah, I was actually thinking about this. Is an interesting question. The first thing that came to my mind is, should everyone or all the product make the world better? Is that a requirement? And then arguably, I think I was actually reading an article that everything we do is toward making the world better. But I think the question might be how much, are we making the world better? What's at a scale, and how much is that? And even if you talk about like, helping a couple of the students to find job, like that's still making their work better than what it could be. But perhaps I think we could, focus more on the product, because as a user researcher, I think at least in many discussions that I participate, usually when we talk about impact, we are talking about how our research make that product better, and that's usually the common common understanding of impact. Again, as I said, it might be many other goals, many other angles, but in companies they're like, okay, what was your impact? They're basically very specific on how did you make our product better. And then that might be interesting focus that we could spend, I don't know, maybe a couple of minutes discussing.
It's an excellent viewpoint. From the analytics side of things, I am reminded here about Microsoft's work with the True System back in the mid 2000s or late 2000s, where they started providing telemetry data support for user research, which was absolutely groundbreaking at the time, that you could supplement your reports with actual, like your observations, with actual measures of how well those players did, or how they progressed. And as I understand our colleagues at the time, that helped a lot in terms of generating impact, because it was qualitative and quantitative data combined. What do you think, Vesman? Is there still a good route, a sort of route to impact within game development?
I think yes, but I also think there is two aspects to it. One is generating, and the other is measuring the impact. When we say let's try to make our product better, that's very vague. Like, how do you measure that something that's now better? So sales usually is a vague measure, because there are many factors impacting sales, and game quality may not be the only one. But if you have analytics, if you look at maybe engagement, if you look at for example, how long players spend in your level, or how many times they like, those are easier things that you can, I guess, link to a better product, maybe. And then once you have access to that, then you can talk about the impact of those changes through those measures that you are now collecting in a more larger scale. And I think that's where then you can say, hey, look, that makes your impact more obvious. I don't know if you guys agree or that makes sense, but
I think I would be putting on my grumpy old guy hat and ask, well, isn't it dangerous to be led by the numbers here? Like, for example, measuring engagement. People can engage a lot with a game and feel horrible, or they can engage a lot with a game and feel really happy about it, and have the kind of a transparency user experience we were talking about earlier. So I always found that the problem with telemetry is that it tells us what people do, but we can only draw inference as to why. So how else can we measure the impact of our user research work? Is it is it in the user experience, or what do you guys think?
I think part of it is looking at this whole, like, the feedback mechanism, right? Like, looking at what do people tell you about the game, and the change that it brought to them. And we're not, like, if we're looking just at dashboards and analytics and track data, we're not getting that. We're getting sort of this big average idea. And of course, with games being such a big industry, it's really hard to drill down. In theory, you would need to do what Lego did back then and send a team of ethnographers to people playing your game and just sit with them for a week and study them and get feedback, and take those notes and bring them back to headquarters. So you should send these teams of 2 to 3 ethnographer people around the world too, to see cultural differences too, because people in Asia might play GTA for a different reason than people in North America, right? Like there might be different impact culturally on the way that your game is played and consumed. And we're not doing a lot of that research, right? Like we just don't, I guess we just don't have the capacity in the industry for that, but it would be very, yeah. I think it would be very valuable. Again, it's, my favorite example is when Lego did that, because Lego was struggling back then, right? Like they were really struggling to grow at some point, and they had to rethink their product line. And so what they did, they sent those user researchers out and had people study why do people play Lego and what do they engage with, right? Like and then they brought those results back. They called them anthros, right? Like anthropologists, basically. And so they brought them back to headquarters and reported back those findings, and worked really well for Lego because they grew like crazy in the last decade. And so obviously things have happened since then, but it was very good for the company back when it happened because it really created some big transformation. And I think we've got the same size of companies in the games industry. If you look at the acquisition of Activision Blizzard by Microsoft, I think that would make for a great opportunity, specifically if you have a more traditional company like Microsoft come in and work with a games company, and you could, in theory, combine that advice. Microsoft has an excellent research arm full of people that are capable of this kind of work. And, if that was combined, I think it could make for really great games. And specifically, if you have these longer term, bigger games like World of Warcraft that people have played for a decade, and that they're really engaged in the community, right? Like looking at how does this gameplay change over time? What is really the feeling that people have there, right? It comes down to this qualitative research, anthropological research. Yeah. Okay.
We could correlate those results with telemetry data, right? That would be fantastically. It would be incredibly interesting. But it's also an example of the kind of sort of large-scale research that, on the academic side at least, we wouldn't get the funding for. But where a company like Microsoft could definitely run it. But it also feels like we're going out a little bit on a tangent here. And I can see that we also running out of time. So maybe let's circle back from this otherwise fascinating topic, which we should talk about in a future podcast. Haha. And maybe try and summarize a little bit sort of the key pieces of advice that we can give people in terms of sort of figuring out, in terms of sort of measuring impact and talking about impact, and also how to generate impact. So, Petsman, do you want to start us out with an industry angle on this?
But I would say understanding what are the key goals in terms of your own career development, as well as the projects and your team, and also understanding how those goals are going to be measured helps you to be strategic in areas that you can act and have higher impact. If you want me to say it in one line, that probably would be it.
So basically, building a strategy for how to deliver impact across all the spheres or areas that we were talking about earlier.
It's not easy. Maybe I should say that this sounds very easy, but it's not. Like understanding, even sometimes knowing your team's goal or what's your product goal. That's such a hard thing to try to agree on in some cases.
Yeah. So your goals, the project goals, the team's goals, the company's goals, etc. Yeah. Perfect. Leonard, what about on the academic side? What are sort of the key pieces of advice that we can give people in terms of generating and measuring impact?
I think you made a very good point that often it's really hard for decision makers to have access to academic research, right? There's a lot being published, but there's maybe minimal real world impact depending on how that knowledge is being made available and made accessible to for the C-level people in companies, for example, the decision makers that actually would need to act on this research. So I think it goes beyond regular evangelism. Evangelism is needed and absolutely useful and very important for folks in user research companies, and it relates to that maturity, increasing the maturity, the UX maturity within your company. I think it should be one of the key goals there. But I think we also need sort of a new breed of user researchers that are kind of looking into academia and that are making that translation. You see a lot of user researchers that have academic training, they go into industry and then they don't necessarily cut ties, but there's not a lot of back communication at that point back into the academy and this kind of keeping current and keeping up to date. And some people are really good at that, but we need more of those folks, right? Like I can definitely see that number of people increasing. If you look on LinkedIn or some of these platforms where people are posting, you can see that they're inspired by recent research papers and they're trying to work that into their practice. And this is actually one of the goals, just to do a shameless plug here for my newsletter, the Academic Tip Tuesday. But one of the goals that I had with that newsletter was to do exactly that we bring that knowledge out of the academy and back into the user research world, right? And so I do think we need more people trying to action some of those research findings that we have that could be really useful. And seeing like how can we turn that into actionable takeaways. And of course, for the academics, it's also like write better papers, folks, because if you write better papers, then people know more about, the thing that you're actually trying to say. And the more accessible that is, the better your language is, the easier it is for people to act upon the research that you write. And so,
and we could also be better. And I'll be the first to admit fault here. We could also be better to translate our papers and put it into blog posts or into 2-page white papers. Like try and make the research more accessible in general, right? Awesome viewpoints there made. But we are running out of time. This has once again, it's been incredibly interesting, and I suspect that the concept of impact will be coming up again in this podcast. There's a lot more to dive into, not the least, how do we actually value impact? But in general, for more on impact and on games user research in general, go to gerbook.com and check out the book. And to our listeners, thank you so much for listening in today. We hope it was enjoyable and informative. We do aim to please. And all the best to everyone. Thank you.
This was another episode of the Games User Research Book podcast. Thank you for tuning in. Check out the Games User Research Book with a blue cover published by Oxford University Press, the only research-backed book out there that provides an authoritative overview of UX research in games. Reading it will accelerate your growth as a game UX researcher so that you can achieve better results faster. Thank you to everyone leaving those 5-star ratings for the book on Amazon. Hey, even if you're not a games user researcher, our book will provide an instant opportunity for you to get an overview of UX in games. Check out Games User Research on Amazon.com. Send us your feedback anytime to editors@gerbook.com and see you in our next episode.